Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to our today's webcast. I'm excited to share this with you. There's some pretty key learnings we're going to get from this, and this is what can artificial intelligence do for humanity? What can go wrong, and how do we ensure we get the optimal results? So thank you very much for joining us. We have people from around the world, so appreciate that. I'm Dan French. I'm founder and CEO of Consider Solutions, and I'm very, very pleased to have with me today Dr. Tom Gruber, who has been a leading light in a lot of technologies associated with augmenting human intelligence for some time. Tom is an impact advisor in Humanistic AI. He's a well-renowned researcher for his work at Stanford. He's a product designer. He's co-founder and CTO of Siri, the intelligent digital assistant, and obviously subsequently a product design executive at Apple. So Tom has got a host of experience of researching and applying artificial intelligence to real business problems. And I'm delighted to have you here, Tom. So welcome.
Thank you, Dan.
So this whole discussion is really not just about can AI save humanity, which is perhaps slightly tongue-in-cheek, but it's also what does it promise for us, for society and for business, and what are the challenges, and what's the responsibility of leadership, and much more. So I'm very pleased to be chairing this discussion. Tom and I are both on the West Coast at the moment, but we're several hundred miles apart. So I'm in Seattle and Tom is in south of San Francisco, and you are all around the world. So this is our discussion. I've got a very brief introduction because this topic is self-explanatory, and Tom is going to lead us into this thoughts about an experience of what AI can do rather than what it's promised in the sci-fi stories, what the experience has been, and talk a lot about unintended consequences, because this is a big issue in this area. We're going to look at the alternatives, and he's going to talk about augmentation and collaboration. And then we're going to have a little fireside chat, if that's possible, virtually, and we'll see. And there'll be a Q&A. Now, if you have any questions as we go through, feel free to enter them into the panel in your GoToWebinar experience on your desktop or your mobile, and we'll answer those. We may not answer them all today. I know there's going to be a lot to discuss, but probably get back to you as well by email if we can't cover it today. So that's our topic. Consider Solutions, many of you, if not most of you, know us. So this is, our rationale, our raison d'etre, about helping drive world-class finance and business operations. And these key things at the left are what we're all focused on, and on the right are the ways in which we deliver it. Whether it's transforming business processes, whether it's managing risk or having financial control and compliance, and all of this is on a platform of technology and data. And of course, today we're all focused on how do we exploit new technologies to achieve our business goals. And this is why the AI conversation is so relevant. Some of the influences of our thinking are our global clients, of which these are a selection, and I know many of you on the call, so thank you for that. But without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Tom and tell us, Tom, what can AI do for humanity?
Thanks, Dan. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with your colleagues here. I'm going to today just offer some insight into the power and potential of AI and some examples, particularly on how it can go wrong and the potential for making it go right. Let's start with what AI can do. So if we think about what AI can do, we start with, well, you've seen this nonlinear upward swoon of techno-utopia, right? It just gets better non-linearly. And then it generally goes through a progression like this. Today we have amazing things. AI can beat us at games. It can see things. It can hear things. We can have personal assistants and driverless cars. They're coming someday soon, right? Almost just around the corner. And at the end, we have this artificial general intelligence, which is either your ticket to an early retirement or the end of the world, depending on whose science fiction you prefer. But I think the end point of general intelligence is actually a distraction at the moment, because long before we get anywhere close to general AI, that is, general AI means it's smarter than all of us all the time. There's a narrow AI that can take advantage of our weaknesses and defeat us today in artificially constructed environments. And in fact, we've already reached that point. There's an application called behavior control, persuasion and control of human behavior, that AI is already better than most humans at doing. So imagine the newspaper headline, AI with big data outwits billions of people. Well, today already, a large portion of our global population spends a substantial amount of time online in systems designed to control their behavior. Of course, I'm not talking about an evil AI that's taken over our minds. I'm talking about Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Snapchat, and other sites that feed on human attention. Now, their behavior control objective is the attention economy. The attention economy, of course, is a simple equation. You get people's attention and exchange that for money. Now, these sites, as you know, are extremely successful at getting people's attention. It's hard to appreciate, actually, think about it, the scale at which almost overnight the behavior of the human population has been dramatically changed. 2/3 of teens use social media many times a day. A quarter of adults say they're almost constantly online. At least these studies are from America. It's similar in Europe. Americans check their phone 80 to 100 times a day, and millennials in particular check their phones 150 times a day, largely for social media. But all this checking doesn't really amount to much time. You can say, well, you're just checking real quickly, right? Well, it turns out it does. Have you ever started to watch something on YouTube, like someone sent you a text for a 3-minute video, and then an hour later you woke up from a trance and you realized you spent an hour? You're not alone. It turns out the average time that people spend in a session with YouTube on mobile is an hour. So do you really intend to watch an hour when you sit down, when you click on that link? In fact, by some measures, the billions of people who use social media like YouTube spend a quarter of their waking lives jacked into those sites, a quarter of their waking lives. And this is not normal behavior. It only happened in the last 5 years. Think about that. And so let's put it in perspective. A huge portion of humanity does this. 2 billion people on Facebook, 2 billion people on YouTube. And to put this in perspective, that's more than the number of followers of the 2 largest world religions, Islam and Christianity, and they don't require you to pray 150 times a day. Phenomenal. Well, how did the titans of the attention economy become so successful? These companies didn't achieve these kinds of results because their founders were brilliant psychologists, designers, or con artists, actually. They got their ability to manipulate behavior at unprecedented scale from AI. Every day, these sites run psychology experiments on their subjects that are orders of magnitude larger than anything ever published in a scientific journal. They gather every scrap of information about how people interact with the systems, aggregated over billions of people every day. They feed this data into the most powerful AI technology deployed at unprecedented scale, and they learn from all of us about how to get us to play along. Now, this is no secret or conspiracy theory. Of the 1 billion hours watched on YouTube each day, 2/3, 70%, are due to the AI-driven recommendation engine. Again, this is an intended consequence. In fact, it's a point of pride of the company. Well, if that's the intended consequence, get people to watch a lot of YouTube, what's the unintended consequence? Well, as Tristan Harris of the Center for Humane Technology says, while we've been upgrading our machines, we've been downgrading our humanity. See, derived empirically, these AI models have discovered techniques that exploit human weaknesses, such as the need for approval, vulnerability to addiction, tribalism, and irrational biases of all kinds. And that is, interestingly enough, is not their goal. It's just what the metrics guided the algorithms to do. And these unintended consequences that exploit these weaknesses include, well, impaired critical thinking, addiction, obsession, depression, and creating an artificial social environment in which outrage is rewarded over dialogue. Now, these are bold claims. Let's dig into some of the facts. Let's talk about critical thinking for a second. Critical thinking, in fact, is essential to human survival. It's not an optional political thing. For example, according to the World Health Organization, anti-vaccine misinformation okay, not the lack of vaccines, the anti-vaccine misinformation problem, much of it driven by recommendation engines, is now a top 10 global health threat. Cases of measles have surged 30% worldwide in recent years, despite an effective vaccine that can prevent it. And now, why blame social media or AI? The internet's full of misinformation and conspiracy theories, of course. We know this, but most people aren't aware of the fact that AI is contributing to the problem by recommending this junk to users. So, for example, let's take something that's uncontroversial. Is the Earth flat? If you do a Google search for pages on the factual question of whether the Earth is round or flat, the Google search will give you 20% of the links that come back are going to say Earth is flat. 80% say Earth is round. Okay. Now, we don't know how many of those pages are generated by bots or Russians or whatever. It doesn't matter. The good news is that you asked Google for these pages, and now you have to do your own research to decide. Your brain is online, ruffling through the pages. However, if you check the content on this question that is recommended by the YouTube recommendation engine, which you did not ask for, 90% of the content on this question says the Earth is flat, not round. Okay. Interesting. In other words, this 2/3 of a billion people's hour a day is now being filled with nonsense. Now, how can this happen? Well, one of the things is dumb, powerful AI based on big data likes to recommend stuff that isn't true. Well, why would that be true? In an MIT study of Twitter, researchers found that fake news spreads much faster and farther than real news. And again, the AI models don't know the difference. They only know that people like clicking on this junk and spreading this stuff, which factors into the model that recommends it. It basically amplifies our human irrationality. Now, it's important to note, this is one of the key ideas from today. This is not general intelligence. In fact, it's very, very narrow, but very powerful AI. They're taking insane amounts of data about how people behave online, what they click on, and what they like to spread, and the algorithms recommend more of the junk that works, okay? But the algorithms have no idea what is false, helpful, or harmful, or just crazy. The algorithms don't know about the content. They only know about surface features of it that make people click on it, okay? And that's the problem. They are idiot savants at manipulating human behavior. Now you could say, oh, come on, we're all adults. I mean, come on, this is the internet. There's a lot of good stuff in there too. But we did not evolve to defend ourselves against this artificial construct where AI we're basically playing a game against the supercomputers. This is particularly hard on human beings whose brains have not fully developed to resist addictive stimuli. Teenagers. Like modern neuroscience tells us that even the regions of their brains involved in resisting addiction and the pressure to conform are not fully developed until the 20s. So this cultural obsession of girls comparing themselves with unrealistic models of reading junk online is actually contributing to a crisis in mental health among teenage girls. A very large study of American adolescents revealed that during the rise of social media on mobile, there has been a massive increase in depressive symptoms, suicide rates, and suicide-related outcomes, especially among girls. Now, there's a lot of causes of suicide, but the study authors explicitly linked this increase in suicide to increases in new media screen use, particularly social media. Okay, whoa, that's a lot. Didn't know that was going on. So what went wrong? Remember, first of all, these are unintended consequences. You know, Zuckerberg isn't going, ooh, I think I'm going to addict teenagers and make them kill themselves. Of course not. In fact, none of the engineers working on this have any goal like that at all. The problem is that what they are working on, the objective function that they're asked to optimize for, is wrong. It's not accounting for the fact that the user and collectively society is impacted by the behavior changes that the algorithms are inducing. So I said this word objective function. We need to drill a little bit into what this is. What's an objective function? Well, step back again. Remember, when we do AI, basically we do the following thing. We build a model which takes an input, like in this case, a picture, an image, and performs a computation like classifying the image, like, okay, is that a cat, is that a dog, and so on. The thing in the middle is the AI model. In this case, it's a classifier. Now the AI, and all AI models have a thing on the side called the objective function, which evaluates how well the model is doing its job. Now, it's also used during training to create the model and test the model. And AI engineers cannot do their work without defining an objective function and continuing to apply it. Okay? The objective function is a metric. It has to be computable by a machine from observation or simulation. And it's an approximation of the real goal because it's a metric based on computation. The machine learning process that these incredible AI machines come up with only optimize for the objective function and have no idea about the human values or the intent underlying these things. Okay? So let's give an example of something, a good use of objective function in games. You know, we've heard that AI is kicking butt against humans in games. It's game over for playing against machines. Okay? Well, it turns out that the objective function is really clear here. And when the role of the AI is to figure out which moves to make, and the objective function is pick moves that lead to winning games. The only thing that matters in a closed world of like Go or chess is winning. I mean, you could consider the carbon impact of the computation. They don't. But basically, the only thing is winning, and no one cares. So winning is what matters. However, in the world in which social media operates, their AI-based systems are effectively playing a competitive game against their human users all the time to get those behaviors they want to maximize. And what is this behavior? It is literally built into the objective functions. 3 things: maximize human time spent on the site, maximize humans clicking on ads, and maximize the viral spread to other human carriers. The problem is that the human is on the wrong side of the equation. I mean, nowhere in the equation are the hard to quantify soft metrics of the impact on this behavior on critical thinking, mental health, and public discourse. Okay, so even when the goal is well intended, to improve human experiences, the cold logic of the objective function can direct the AI model to get in trouble. So let's take an example. If the only thing that matters is optimizing the metrics, be careful what you ask for. Remember, there was a couple years ago, Mark Zuckerberg, head of Facebook, said, we love people, our mission is to bring the world closer together. So he set corporate objectives for his team to optimize the AI to suggest groups. And here's on stage saying, it worked. The first 6 months, we helped 50% more people join meaningful communities. In other words, 50% more people join groups in 6 months alone because the AI machine recommended stuff for them to join, and it drove people to join those groups. Okay, guess what? Unintended consequences. The recommendation engine did its thing. So here's an example on the left. When someone joins a new group on Facebook, say, hey, you're a new mom, here's a new mom support group. And on the right column, where all the ads are, you see suggested groups. The algorithm suggests other groups to join. In this case, how about some anti-vaccine conspiracy theories? Now, again, the AI doesn't know this, but that's what that's what the machine that's in place will do. So we're trying to bring people together. We bring people together with nutcases. Okay. This is not what we intended. By the way, this is all these black slides I talk. A lot of it comes from this Center for Humane Technology that I work with. I quoted the leader of it, Tristan Harris, a bit ago. This organization is informing industry, and industry is responding. We've talked to Facebook and Google and Apple and everybody, and everyone's trying to deal a little bit with the issue here. But the problem is that you can, and they patched this, by the way, if you're a new mom in Facebook, it doesn't recommend anti-vaccine stuff anymore. But this is a system problem. It's not an isolated incident. It was a consequence of the AI team optimizing for the quantitative objective of people joining groups. And it was not optimized for groups that make sense or that are helpful for human beings. Now, this is a hard problem to solve, because to solve the problem, you have to measure more than just clicks. You have to measure, is the content or the behavior harmful? And everyone wants to run away from this problem. In fact, in the game now, it's not just supercomputers against users, it involves adversaries like propagandists and scaremongers and fake content providers. Some of them are human, some of them not, okay? So it's a real mess, but we've got to do something about it, and I think we can. But for today's conversation, you're not running a social media organization. You're making choices about AI every day, and there's an alternative you can start from scratch with an alternative to avoid some of the unintended consequences. So remember, I promised there's more than one way to do this. And the way I like to talk about this is called Humanistic AI, which puts the human at the center. It's AI designed to empower humans rather than compete with them. Okay, so it's the same idea as humanism from the Renaissance and everything, that humans really are the center, and our tools and technologies should support the humans. The key in our case with AI is how to build human benefit into the objective function from the beginning. So let's take a look at the model and the human. In this case, the model is not to outperform the human, to compete with the human, to win, to defeat the human. The model is to augment or collaborate with the human, and the objective function is no longer to do what the human does but better, but to optimize the joint performance of the combination of the human and the machine. So let's take an example. This is medical imaging, diagnosis. Everyone's talking about we're not going to have radiologists anymore because humans are going to take over their jobs. It's not true. They're going to augment their jobs. In fact, the best way to build an AI model for radiology, for in this case pathology, is to optimize the model so that the human and the machine together, basically the first and second opinions, together do a better diagnosis than individually. And I've talked about this publicly before, that there's well-known cases where the AI models are getting better and better, approximating human performance, in some cases beating them. But if you combine the two, it's an order of magnitude better performance, because humans and machines do different things differently. Okay? Now let's talk about some applications that you can choose. So one way of thinking of this, you have an application like diagnosis, then redefine the objective function and rebuild your models for joint performance. Another way of thinking about this is to rethink what applications you do in the first place, so that the human benefit is the objective function from the very beginning. So I'll give you an example. My very first AI application in 1983, it's been a while, was called a communication assistant. It basically helped people who could not speak because of neurological conditions like cerebral palsy. And they, it's like Stephen Hawking. They could basically click or sip a straw or move their head or something, and then the machine would offer choices. And then when the choice came up, they would sort of click or whatever, and it would slowly construct sentences. It's very tedious and slow to do this, so I built an AI machine that could predict what they're trying to say. This is kind of like what you do with your keyboard on your phone today. It uses AI language models and world models of the user's world. Now, the objective function for this system is the joint performance, and in fact, it's the human performance. Most humans are already pretty good at speaking. The ones with neurological conditions aren't. Let's make them better at speaking by augmenting them with an AI machine that can predict what they're going to say. And in this case, it's clear that if you build it this way, you have to also optimize for things like, how do you get the model to be better to adapt to the person? So you actually have a different flavor of AI, because now it has to be highly personalized AI. This is not average speech for average people. This is speech for a particular person. Okay. Now, just to follow through, that was 36 years ago. Today, I'm working with a company called Cognition, which has the state of the art of this today is essentially using your eyes, which is amazing. You can just look at the iPad. It knows what things you're looking at with no other external hardware, and then you can speak with your eyes. Again, using AI in the model of the language, but also AI in interpreting your three-dimensional head position and your eye gaze. This is pretty cool, but even more mind-blowing is this. You can speak with your brain, even if you're really locked in, or maybe if you're feeling like a couch potato someday on your AR glasses, you can just think about the thing you want to click on, and it can hear your thinking in the back of your head and invoke the system. Pretty amazing, and all because of the deep neural nets. And again, the AI model here is augmenting what was formerly really messy EEG data, so that you can precisely identify what they're thinking about, which object they're looking at, basically, and generate speech. In fact, control their whole environment, open doors, that kind of thing. Okay. And the impact on humanity, well, is hard to overstate. I mean, this guy, Professor Manelli, he spoke 7 languages until he had a brainstem stroke, a really nasty stroke, wiped him out, couldn't talk at all. And then he writes things like this: medicine is an art as well as a science, and great art requires great imagination, the capacity for empathy. Take the opportunity to see your own suffering in the suffering of others. For when you can see others' suffering as your own, you will be greatly rewarded. So incredible humanistic applications that are possible now because of not only the existence of AI technology, but choosing to use it in ways that optimize human performance, augmentation. Another example is mental health care. Here's a problem where humans actually suck at it. There is absolutely no objective scientific measurement, so all we have to go by is people's opinions. Psychiatrists or psychologists will interview you and say, yep, sounds like you're schizophrenic, or sounds like you got major depressive disorder, or whatever. Now, look, these people go to school for 20 years. It's not like they don't know anything. It's just that it's really hard to predict human mental health care breakdowns. Now, it's unlike going to the doctor where you get a blood test or whatever. Well, it turns out that with AI now, we're starting to change that. There's a company called MindStrong, which I'm advising, and they have a scheme called digital brain biomarkers. So instead of just talking to you and making check boxes on a piece of paper, this machine watches how you use your phone. It turns out that these smartphones are actually incredibly hard to use. Don't tell anyone I said that, but I mean, they are hard to use. And because of that, they actually really exercise the major functions of your brain. And so they're very sensitive metrics for how well your brain is doing. And so AI can, of course, look at very, very subtle changes in timing on the way you use a keyboard or scroll or things like this. And it turns out that disruptions in those ways you use your phone are predictive of mental breakdown. So here's an eye chart that basically represents some of the data in a neural net. It's a very large fat model that can predict from about 2,000 data points a day how your mental health is doing. And this is a cartoon example of how you would apply that. Basically, here's a woman. This is a real case, but there's a woman who had a psychotic diagnosis, and she was on her meds and doing fine. And then the machine started, the AI started noticing that things aren't going well, and it alerted her and her caregivers, and they talked about it. And she said, "Okay, I'll go in and take myself into the hospital." And sure enough, she had a major, psychotic breakdown, but in the hospital where she was able to be treated. And the alternative would have been she'd been on the street, right, with no meds. It would have been really bad. So this is an incredible thing that's being possible because we chose to use these neural nets and this new AI technology for the benefit of the human, biomarkers. Okay? So it's a superhuman skill, but it's not competing with humans. It's really kind of key. In fact, in general, if we look at this, there's a new kind of healthcare in general, and it's applied to things like migraines, epileptic seizures, and so on, where we have very weak and messy data coming off the humans from their wearables and stuff, but the AI models can make sense of this stuff and use these predictions to give better care. Okay. So the objective function of these things is, in fact, kind of exciting, improving the human conditions. So these are just a few points. I'm going fast, so we have a lot of time for conversation, but these are a few points in the whole range of things that are humanistic AI. But let's think about how we might use this perspective to turn things around a little bit, from where an AI is being used to compete with humans, to manipulate them, to addict them, and redefine the objective function to include human benefit. Now, it's a hard problem because much of this misalignment of AI and human benefit is due to a single-minded profit motive in the business models driving these applications. I mean, advertising sells. Right? But there's another way of thinking about it. So first point is the concept of double bottom line. This is the idea that in addition to measuring and valuing profit, a corporation can measure and evaluate human impact. Now, corporate leaders can guide and reward their employees to achieve both kinds of results. Now, in an organization run with double bottom line, AI teams can be tasked with developing models and defining objective functions that incorporate positive human impact. Now, the double bottom line culture and philosophy is it can be measured. We don't have to give up a measurement. It's not just fuzzy feel-good stuff, but human impact is just as important as profit. And in fact, these days, the trend is triple bottom line, where the third stakeholder is the environment. Now, you say, you're just some academic from California. What the hell do you know? Well, it turns out that it's not just a crazy idea. It's the philosophy, for example, of the chairman of the second largest conglomerate in Korea, Chae-Tae-won. This, by the way, is probably worth as much as Apple. It's a privately held conglomerate. As he says, corporations pursuing social value not only enhance the loyalty of existing customers, but also attracts new customers, which will lead companies to long-standing stability and growth. It's actually a sound business if you're running a long-term sort of service that you want the entire society to use. It's a really good business plan to align your company and all the technology it uses with their human benefit rather than your quarterly profits. So and he's not alone in this business. A lot of businesses are like this, the telcos and other kinds of businesses that are essentially semi-utilities that want to hold on to their customers forever. Now, it's not just specialized things. Double bottom line it takes real leadership to pull this off, but in general, the generalization of this idea is essentially inclusive stakeholding or multi-stakeholding. And that means that shareholders are one stakeholder, and there's other stakeholders, including users and employees and the environment. And in fact, the Business Roundtable, which is a group of 181 of the largest companies in the world, basically went on record. This includes Amazon, Apple, and so on. They said that the purpose of a corporation is not just to serve shareholders, but to create value for all of our stakeholders. And of course, it depends on whether the users are the products or the customers. And that's a tricky thing. And in case of some companies like business models like Apple, the users are customers. Other companies in the attention economy, the users are products. So it's tricky, but they still can be stakeholders even if they're not customers. So and all of these companies are metric crazy companies, right? The trick here is to steer the metric driven hierarchical organization so that when the AI is involved in it, it's aligned with human values. You say, oh yeah, whatever, but in my case, I got a tough business and I got to make money. I can't be doing double bottom line stuff or whatever. My customer is my objective, but they need to make money. Okay, so, put it this way. There's lots of ways to make money by doing well, by doing good. And we're at this point now in AI where you can choose your projects. And this is a leverage point for executives and leaders to choose, of all the AI things you might do, choose those who have humanistic goals inherent in their objective. So I'll give you one of my favorite ones. The business of supporting elderly people in their desire to live longer in their own homes, postponing the need for institutional care. This is called Aging in Place. And the industry is worth hundreds of billions of dollars a year worldwide. Now, the problems that AI can help solve in this business include understanding what's going on in the lives of the elderly at home and helping them take care of themselves. And there are lots of AI companies already at work in this domain. A related problem is something called medical compliance, which is essentially helping people to remember to take their medicine. It's a major factor in the effectiveness of healthcare. We spend billions to create a drug, and then we screw up in how it's taken. Now, there's work on AI systems that monitor whether pills are taking. I mean, actually, the state of the art today is not that impressive. It's like, hey, show your phone that you took the pill, whatever, okay? But I'm actually more excited by the work on conversational virtual assistants that actually have a relationship with the patient and kind of ask them how they're feeling and doing and kind of check in. Did you take the pills? Oh, well, yeah. Did you take the blue one? Oh, no, maybe not. Or what is the blue one? Have a conversation about it. And these conversational assistants are actually getting traction, believe it or not, because the alternative is fine. Is a paid medical practitioner like a nurse assistant who calls every day. But it turns out that a lot of people don't mind talking to an assistant that never gets bored talking to them, and don't mind checking in with them. They might be a little bit ashamed to talk to the compliance nurse. Now, this same idea isn't just for sick or elderly people. In fact, there's these virtual assistants are becoming the rage now for all kinds of wellness, including, you know, athletic performance and chronic disease management, particularly like diabetes and you know, cardiovascular disease and so on. These things are behavior diseases. So essentially, if behavior control is a thing that AI is getting good at, let's point it in the right direction. In fact, there's a lot to learn about the science of human motivation and how you can use the sort of quote nudge or, you know, intelligent feedback to get people to behave the way you want. But again, listen, think about this. If we can iterate our way to systems that convince about 2 billion people to put in 1 to 3 hours a day scrolling and tapping crouched over tiny little screens, you think we maybe ought to make some progress on the psychology needed to guide us toward healthy self-care. And by the way, the point of this one is if you can pull this off with AI, you're going to be sitting in a pile of gold, because this is a giant problem. Now, as we move towards the discussion part of the meeting today, let's look at the big picture. If we want to build humanistic AI, we need to factor in the human impact right from the start and build it into the very process by which we train and evaluate our AI models. Now, this is an engineering challenge, but it doesn't require breakthroughs in AI. The AI does not have to know the difference between right and wrong. It just has to be pointed in the direction of human benefit. So if you think about it, like, let's say something like a gaming industry. The gaming industry is riddled with violence and self-destructive addiction, right? A lot of the gaming companies are moving towards more and more immersive situations where there's like electrodes on the user, or, you know, not electrodes, EMG sensors, cameras facing their faces. Certainly they have microphones on people already. There's a ton of ways that these gaming businesses are getting feedback about how the humans are, how they're doing right now in the middle of a game. And you could take that same technology and make them even more addicted to a first-person shooter, or you could take that same technology and teach humans how to do more pro-social or self-care behaviors. And the same sort of learning loop that the giant social media companies use by watch 1 billion people do it, try things, do experiments, see what works, optimize the function. That same technology development spiral can be used for human benefit. Now, it should be clear by now that when things go wrong with AI, it's not because some rogue engineer went mad. When it all goes well, it's because the AI is a narrow AI, not a sentient, beneficial, kind AI. It's just, the AI is not magical. It's a powerful optimization technique. But the difference between when it goes well and doesn't go well is about human leadership. So here's a few concluding thoughts if you're a leader and you're thinking about the governance of AI. The first one is be mindful of what you ask for from AI. Get involved in the definition of objective functions. The classic metaphor here is the mistake of King Midas, right? Who asked for the power to turn everything into gold, only to lose everything that mattered most to him. It's the king's involved in this, not just the technology people. Okay. Secondly, when we measure and celebrate success in our companies, let's celebrate the success of AI in terms of human empowerment, not beating humans at our own game. The AI itself, AI technology culture, is riddled with competitions to see who can beat a human at speech or vision or whatever. But within companies, let's see if we can celebrate how did we augment or collaborate with people to improve human experience. In fact, Dean Kamen, I don't know if you know Dean Kamen, is one of the world's greatest inventors. He ran the Segway and a bunch of other things. He basically has a really good point. He says a nation gets what it celebrates. In his case, he wants to celebrate people doing robotics instead of beating each other up in sports. And finally, let's look for applications with a win-win for machine and human, so that when machines get smarter, we all get smarter. Now I'll close with a comment, a quote from the leader of the 5th largest economy in the world. It's one larger than the United Kingdom. It's California. This is Gavin Newsom, the governor. He was giving a speech at Stanford University where they were announcing the creation of a new institute for human-centered AI. And I watched it carefully. Instead of going, rah, rah, you guys are wonderful, he said, hold on a second. Many of you who created this AI technology are scaring my people. You know, he said, look, we don't just want AI that can perform as well as people. We want AI that augments them. And what he said in his concluding remarks was, our number one job is to make everyone smarter. And I couldn't agree more. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. That was quite a tour through. So I think we've got a few questions. I want to discuss a few of these topics with you. So draw your chair up the far side. I'll put a log on.
Ah, very nice.
We'll have a little chat here. Now that was, we've talked this through before, but that is a really broad-ranging and very thought-provoking discussion. You've explained very clearly what we've all observed in terms of the use of certainly large-scale social media, but also you've got to the root of some of the issues for leaders. I've got a couple of thoughts on this. I mean, you've raised some really interesting governance questions, and when it comes to technology, quite often we think of governance as the governance over the technical mechanisms. But I think you're really talking about a governance of purpose over AI. Do you want to give me some thoughts about that? Share that with the group.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have we've had this conversation with like policy people as well as business people, and this distinction you just made, it always comes up. It's really important. If you only govern the procedures, like, are you making the thing check the following boxes? Are you making it efficient or safe or whatever? That misses the point, because in this case, AI is an optimization machine. It's optimization technology, and you have to tell it what to optimize for. And these optimization criteria, these objective functions, are tricky to do well, because it's not like playing chess where there's a clear-cut win and lose. The objectives are not black and white; they're nuanced, and so that is a challenge. So, you know, how do in fact you change the nature of the game optimization so that human benefit is included? Well, you have to design and engineer and solve problems about how do you measure human wellness. How do you change the medical thing so that how do you build a surveillance technology so it's used to help people live with dignity at home rather than to steal their civil liberties? Well, it's the same technology, but you want to optimize it for detecting whether people are hurt and need help rather than optimizing for whether they're you know, in some place you don't want them to be. So anyway, that's the main thing. And I think that the general principle is in the new world here, optimization functions extend all the way up to the C-suite in terms of their impact. And it's surprising how quickly it's surprising how easy it is for a data scientist to get locked into a local objective and not have any idea that the thing goes crazy because of the global objectives not being met. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think it's really interesting. You use this term, the objective function, and I'm very taken by your comment earlier about the games. You know, to the machine, to the AI, the only thing that matters is winning. And as humans, we might say, yes, well, that's true in competition. But as humans, we realize it's a lot more nuanced in that if you're playing a game of chess or whatever, you want to win, but if the house starts burning down, there's something more important than winning. And I think this brings into the whole business discussion with the nuances of what performance measures are, metrics, you know, KPIs. Every business is driven by key performance indicators, and these are basically your objective functions. You know, that's kind of the business term for it. And I think it's kind of interesting because we know in business that you focus on a KPI too hard and you get the wrong results. So, for example, we know everyone knows the experiences of driving to kind of reduce human effort in a particular endeavor, whether it's a call center or whatever. You might reduce human effort and reduce costs, but lose your customers. So the fact is, there is no single KPI, there's no single objective function that I think works in any business endeavor, which is what you've highlighted so clearly. And I think, you know, come back to a business sense, and that's why, you know, I think 15, 20 years ago, people came up with this idea of a balanced scorecard, not just a KPI, but what's the balance of leading and lagging indicators that produce the outcome we want. And I feel that you've kind of touched a bit on that in this, this discussion about AI. Does that make sense to you?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, not only the balance. I mean, the first point, there's objectives are multi-faceted, right? You do want a balanced scorecard, not just a single objective, especially if it's profit. The other thing is that there's often missing objectives that are just currently not measured because they're hard to measure. And so the sort of philosophy of double bottom line accounting, and even this whole idea of humanistic AI, says we've got a new set of problems to solve. How do we measure human wellness, human benefit in our objective function? We may have to say, okay, task one, before you start building AI models, is figure out how to measure this stuff. And oftentimes this is where the real advances come from, because once you've got objective measures, it's not that big of a deal to build an AI model that optimizes it.
And the challenge is to come up with the right measures, and I think that's the challenge for leadership. It's very easy to say, go off and do this and do something smart, but it's coming up with the right measures, the right performance indicators is hard. I mean, you talked about the double bottom line and triple bottom line approach, and not just financial performance, but human impact and environmental impact, which we know organizations are all embracing around the world now. But there's a lot of these ideas are coming into this idea of principled performance. It's not enough just to achieve the numbers. You have to achieve it in a way that's acceptable to an ethical framework and to your broader stakeholder group. That's
exactly. And long term, short term is the same issue, right? So the numbers can't just be quarterly or weekly. It has to be factor in the long term relationship with the society.
Okay. So I'll put another log on the fire. Are you feeling warm yet? Are you feeling the heat coming out of that fire? Yeah, well, so that's not a forest fire, that's a real fire. So many of our guests and attendees here are corporate CFOs, CIOs, and leaders of global business services, running big chunks of their what some people might regard as the administration of big business. What should they take away from this discussion?
Well, I guess the highest level thing is essentially, and I learned this from just talking with a bunch of business leaders, I didn't realize to the extent to which they are at a disadvantage in the way governance works, is that you're a disadvantage. You're inherently disconnected from the objective function of the AI. If you do business as usual, you're going to end up with the decisions about what goes into the objectives being way down the line in delegation, and you may not like the outcome. So the key thing here is to take responsibility in the form of clearly stating, first of all, choosing the applications so that they have humanistic benefit, and secondly, setting the objectives so that they are optimized for the right things, and asks to be shown that they're solving the hard problems of how do you measure human benefit, and reward and celebrate success along those lines. I think that's, as we do that, we see companies that do that, they get better results.
Right. So when you look at, as a leader, you look at desired outcomes. What does good look like? What are we aiming for? And the ability to turn that into performance measures that together make sense, that then you can allow AI to have some impact on. Sounds like a good move. Yeah. So I've got another point here, which is kind of an observation. I don't know whether you'd agree with it, but my experience particularly or my observation is that kind of, in general, throughout history, we tend to, well, certainly in recent history, we tend to overestimate the power and impact of new technologies. We get very excited. We have this big hype cycle. We get massively excited about this, that, and the other technology. It's going to change the world. It's going to eliminate all the workers. And in general, we massively overestimate and realize that actually these technologies are a little bit more mundane than we might have thought. It seems to me from your conversation, particularly about the evidence of unanticipated consequences, this is one area where we may be wrong. I mean, we may have underestimated the power of AI, possibly in your discussion, from both a negative and a positive point of view. Do you think, is that fair?
Yeah, I think what's happening is, if you think about how knowledge progresses in history, right? We're muddled along for a while, then we got the scientific method, and then we got the Industrial Revolution from that, and then but we've been muddling along at the pace of scientific progress for a while, which is not bad. But what's happened in the last 10 years, especially the last 5 years, is that big data is now cheap to accumulate, and big data combined with neural network technologies allows people to essentially accelerate the learning curve for understanding the data in new ways, beyond what the normal scientific process does. It's especially obvious in places like medicine and engineering. So what's going on here is, yes, I think you're right. We have essentially a nonlinear growth and capability in AI. Now but remember where the growth is coming from. The growth is where there's a data set that characterizes the phenomenon. It is now really easy to build a much better model of that data than we used to build using human manual methods. Machines are just really good at that. But where there is no model of the data, the machines have no clue either. So let's take, for example, mental health care thing. The mental health care, we had no theory of how to predict mental health conditions, but then we found some data which we didn't think was about mental health. It was about using smartphones. But lo and behold, it became a source of information to make theories about mental health prediction. And so that's where we're getting this acceleration. We're getting surprising sources of data and surprising kinds of inferences that can be made from the data. And so that's what I would look for in your own businesses, is where are the data that you might be able to find hidden treasures of insight from, and beware of how quickly that models can be built that accurately make sense of that data.
Yeah, and I guess it's beware of technology for its own sake. I mean, just recently we've had a big explosion in this idea of robotic process automation, which is neither robotic nor process focused. It's sort of task automation. And a lot of executives have said, right, RPA is a new thing. I want to have 100 robots in our business by September. And then only when they've done all that, and 2 years later, they look back and say, what were we doing? What kind of measure of success was that? It was nonsense. And I think, again, with AI, you just got to be careful not to say, right, use AI. It is the responsibility of leaders to decide the business outcomes we want, the nuances of those business outcomes, and what affects the performance, and then encourage the technology people or the service providers to deliver AI-based services that support that. I think maybe that's the future.
So the other thing I've heard is that, go ahead now.
No, carry on.
Well, just one more thought. There's a lot. If you're choosing AI projects in a large corporation, remember that most of them are going to fail just because it's new technology for people to play with. So it's okay, have a portfolio of projects, but also when they fail, they should fail at an objective that you wanted them to succeed at, not fail by unintended consequences. And so I think that's the big difference now, is allow there to be a portfolio of hedging your bets on what kind of projects might work. If you want to robotically automate things, fine, but keep that in a box with other things, and then you can pick and choose your results. So that's what we found, and the most successful AI is essentially an empirical science. You're going to be constantly experimenting with what might work, and keep an open mind to picking the ones that are helping your company the best.
Yeah, that's a great closing thought, Tom. I'm conscious of time. It's been great to talk to you and hear your experiences and your thoughts. It's certainly been an eye-opener for me. I hope I know people around the world listening to this will have found this equally thought-provoking. I think we'll draw it to a close. Thank you so much for your time. It's given us a lot of food for thought. So I will speak to you soon, Tom, and thank you very much. It's been a great session.
Fantastic. It's been great. Thanks very much, Dan.